Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 971, The Thunderfire Bow. To the incoming attack of Swordlight, the puppet simply pointed to the silver shield in front of it and did nothing else. In a flare of light, the shield grew several times thicker before flying forward to meet the attack. The swordlight struck the silver luminescent shield with full force, resulting in a resounding explosion as flashes of white and green light coloring the sky, but the shield stood as firm as a mountain against the raging tide. Old Man Bitter Bamboo grimaced at the sight, and a trace of astonishment appeared on Han Li's face. Monarch Soul Divergence said in voice transmission, "It appears the might of the Tailstar shield is above what was expected. Despite being a newly refined magic treasure and having yet been tempered, it has absolutely no problem blocking the strikes of ordinary magic treasures. However, I suspect only the puppet is able to bring out this degree of power. If you were to control the shield, you would only be able to display half as much might." Han Li bluntly replied, "Of course, the degree of power one can display from a magic treasure depends on its might, the amount of time tempered, the total magic power channeled into it, as well as one's control of spiritual sense. Storing spiritual power as magic power is the foundation of cultivation. This puppet is refined from rare materials and can pour 3 times as much magic power into the shield than I can." Having spent so many days under Monarch Soul Divergence's personal guidance, his grasp of puppet techniques had reached a profoundly high level. Monarch Soul Divergence may still prove his superior by far in this regard, but there are no others in this world that could hope to best him in puppet techniques. Monarch Soul Divergence chuckled and added, "Although the Tailstar shield was something that you refined and gave to the puppet, it was created with its characteristics in mind. It is quite different from an ordinary magic treasure. Even if you channeled as much magic power into the shield, you still wouldn't be produce as much of its strength as the puppet." Han Li nodded and said little else, turning his attention back to the battle. At that moment, Old Man Bitter Bamboo gave his swords another order. Seeing that they were helpless in the face of that shield, he had them create another sword formation above his head in preparation for an attack. After pointing to the formation, the swords let out a ring and began to spin around in the air. In a flash of light, they formed a 3-meter-wide wheel. He struck the wheel with several spell seals, causing it to rotate with increasing speed. Blinding green light then blazed at its center and concentrated in a beam of energy, fiercely striking at the silver shield. A muffled bang sounded out, and a ball of green light erupted from the shield. The ball was massive and caved in the center of the shield of light. The depression quickly grew deeper as if it were on the verge of collapse. At that moment, the puppet pointed to the shield and it began scattering into specks of white light. Then, the huge ball continued its overbearing charge forward and directly struck the physical shield behind it. The silver shield trembled violently against the strike, but rather than shattering, it suddenly flowed with intermittent light and the surface became reflective like a mirror. Under the silver glow, the ball of light intensely quaked and began to decompose into countless smaller balls, shrinking down to less than half its original size as they scattered away. Then, the shield tilted and burst with silver light, repelling the remaining attack before it ruptured in the air and disappeared. Old Man Bitter Bamboo let out a deep sigh and was unable to conceal his shock. He stared at the puppet across from him with a grave expression. Although that previous strike hadn't displayed the sword formation's full might, the shield was still able to block such a heavy attack with ease, revealing an unfathomable defensive capability. As he pondered about activating the sword formation's final ability, hesitation lingered in his mind. Monarch Soul Divergence then said with a pleased tone, "All right, since the Tailstar shield is this powerful, the elemental barrier won't need to be tested. Created from the elemental jade, its might won't be any lesser. Now let's test the puppet's attacks." "Got it," Han Li calmly replied. Purple light began to glow from the puppet's eyes and it silently twisted its hands, producing a ball of faint red light. Then in a blinding flash, it turned into a several-inch-long red bow. It had an exquisite appearance with the carving of a flood dragon and sparkling red scales. A dragon-piercing bow. Old Man Bitter Bamboo immediately shouted. The puppet remained expressionless as it uttered, "This is a Thunderfire Bow, not a dragon-piercing bow. I must warn you that it's refined from the tendons of a flood dragon, and its might is even greater." The old man immediately felt his heart sink. Soon after, the puppet summoned an emerald green arrow to its other hand in a clap of thunder. It quickly muttered an incantation, and the miniature bow and arrow began to brightly shine with light before expanding to a normal size. Talisman characters flickered on the surface of the bow as scarlet flames wrapped around it. As for the green arrow, it shined with golden light and released several arcs of lightning, followed by pangs of thunder. The puppet narked the arrow and slowly pulled back the bowstring. Lightning and flames had already begun to fuse together around the arrow before release, letting out deafening booms. Then, an overwhelming spiritual pressure was released from its body. When the distant core formation stage observers felt this spiritual wave, the air grew heavy as the light barriers protecting their bodies began to waver. Those with particularly weaker cultivation began to turn tail with fearful expressions. After sensing the puppet's spiritual chi, Old Man Bitter Bamboo paled and loudly shouted, "Stay your hand. The competition ends here. I forfeit." Although he said this, he hadn't overlooked his defenses. With a flip of his hand, a triangular pendant shot out and began to surge with green, red, and yellow light, forming a strange barrier in front of him. Then, he waved at the sword while spinning in the air, dissolving it and having them revolve around him in a protective formation. Han Li was surprised to see him take such drastic measures. He frowned, asking, "Is the might of the Thunderfire Bow so great that it can inspire such fear?" With the massive spiritual power of a late nascent soul cultivator, any magic treasure would be fearsome. With the addition of a bow refined from the very bones and tendons of a scarlet flame flood dragon, your arrow refined from golden lightning bamboo, and the complex fusion of their powers, it is no surprise he felt such danger. After all, he isn't a late nascent soul cultivator. If you were to use the puppet's full power, there is a 40% chance of slaying him in a single strike. Do you have an interest in killing him? Monarch Soul Divergence asked with a cold laugh. Han Li inwardly shook his head and said, "Forget it, I'm not particularly interested in slaughter and the Black Phoenix feathers take priority. If the strike fails to kill him and he activates the island's restrictions, it will be trouble. And given his grand reputation, he should have a method to preserve his life as well, and the attempt could spectacularly backfire. It seems we won't be able to test the puppet's true offensive power." Monarch Soul Divergence sighed and muttered, "It is no matter. I've already personally witnessed the puppet easily suppress a cultivator at the peak of mid-nascent soul stage. It clearly illustrates that its abilities are no lesser than that of a late nascent soul cultivator. I no longer have any regrets now that I know my life's efforts weren't wasted." When Han Li heard this, a trace of sadness was betrayed from his face. The astonishing spiritual chi from the puppet's body slowly disappeared. In a flash of light, the arrow and bow returned to their original size and both elements had faded away. Old Man Bitter Bamboo was relieved to see this, but he still felt cold sweat line his back. In the instant he was targeted, he sensed that his life in danger and immediately conceded. From the abilities and spiritual pressure that his opponent had displayed, there was no longer any doubt that he was a late nascent soul cultivator. It appears that it was a wise decision to come out of seclusion to deal with these people. He didn't believe that the island's myriad tree formation would be able to stop the wrath of a late nascent soul eccentric, not to mention that he had a mid-nascent soul cultivator following him as well. He put away his own magic treasures as well and then beckoned the two to meet him again at the tree hall. This time, he spoke to them with an exceptionally polite attitude. He handed a magic tool to his old steward and commanded him to pluck off several of the phoenix's feathers. Then, he began to chat with them to see if he could ask about their origins. After all, the puppet's appearance didn't match the description any of the late nascent soul cultivators on the continent. While Han Li had a lively chat with Old Man Bitter Bamboo, the puppet remained deathly silent. After talking for a long while, the old man hadn't found any relevant information. He could only wryly laugh to himself as he was helpless to find any further information. A quarter hour later, the steward came back with a jade box and respectfully presented it to his master. Old Man Bitter Bamboo glanced at the two visiting cultivators, and with a sweep of his sleeve, he tossed the box over to Han Li. He was now able to see that although this cultivator Li seemed unwilling to deal with others, so he tactfully handed it over to Han Li. Han Li bluntly took the jade box and opened it to reveal a line of dazzling red feathers. After he examined them with a squint, he couldn't help but smile. Half a day later, Han Li and the puppet left Bitter Bamboo Island in 2 trails of light. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared from the nearby skies. Chapter 972, Taming a Beast. Three days later, Han Li appeared at a nameless island. He stood on a huge boulder on the shore and solemnly watched Monarch Soul Divergence's small puppet body. Han Li slowly asked, "Does Xianxia truly wish to pass away of his own accord? I still have methods that can allow your soul to persist for another month or 2. The miniature puppet shook its head and said, "What does a few more days matter to me? I don't want to trouble you in this matter. In that case, I won't say anything else. I hope you'll be able to reincarnate and have the opportunity to cultivate in your next life." How could the path of reincarnation be so easily tread? Even if I reincarnate, I might not take the body of a human. Ah yes, youngster Han, do you remember that you'd agree to one request since I researched the refinement process for the Tri-Flame fan? Of course I remember. Do you think I'd forget if you hadn't mentioned it? Han Li said with a wry smile. Monarch Soul Divergence snorted. In that case, I will make good use of it. My request is quite simple. If it is possible, I hope you will reclaim the 1000 Bamboo School in the far west, take in a disciple on my behalf, and continue my legacy. Do not allow my teachings to die out. The current head of the school is not someone that had stemmed from my own personal disciples. I feel ill at ease over the matter. It is no problem, Han Li quickly replied. When the time comes, I will take in a talented disciple and teach them all of your puppet techniques. Later, I will have them become the 1000 Bamboo Sect Master. Monarch Soul Divergence bellowed with laughter. Your words have put my heart at ease. I've collected all my techniques, life's experiences, and knowledge into a set of jade slips I call the Great Development Treasure Scriptures. I've left them all in my Heaven Fortune cask. Learn as much of it as you can, and teach them to the succeeding disciples of the 1000 Bamboo School. Only then will my legacy be truly passed on. A fist-sized ball of green light then shot out from the puppet body and soared to the skies. As a series of cryptic incantations sounded out from it, the light suddenly surged, quickly turning into a blinding 3-meter wide will 100 meters in the air, forcing Han Li to squint his eyes at the sight. Then, the incantations came to a sudden halt and the area became silent. A quarter hour later, the wheel shrank and loudly ruptured, filling half of the sky with specks of green light in a marvelous display. Han Li sadly watched this funeral unfold. With this, the sect-establishing Grandmaster known as the Monarch of Soul Divergence had passed away. He quietly peered upon sky for a long while and drew a deep breath before lowering his gaze to find a lifeless small puppet floating in midair. After putting it away in a wind of azure light, he slapped the bamboo tube on his back and summoned several jade slips out from it. Han Li swept his spiritual sense through the jade slips and read that they did indeed contain the experiences of Monarch Soul Divergence's life, including many secret techniques as well as many strange secrets of the cultivation world. After a while, he put away the jade slips in his storage pouch and muttered to himself as he sank into thought. Now that the grand puppet was complete, the next step was to refine the Tri-Flame fan. Then, he should have enough strength to face the Elder Devil. However, the fan would be somewhat troublesome to create. He would need the assistance of the true flames of Earth, Heaven, and Man. During his time at the 100 Possibilities Pavilion 1, he grew quite interested in their vein of earth-lung fire. In truth, he had wanted to use the flames to assist him in refining the materials, but now that he was in the Great Jinn, the matter was impossible. If he wanted to refine the materials that required earth fire, he'd have to find another pure reservoir. There were many in the Great Jinn and quite a few famous ones that didn't belong to any sect. Rather, these areas were easy to find, but they were desolate lands that lacked spiritual chi. As for flames of man, a true fire of any cultivator would do, including his nascent flame. The sole problem was finding the flames of heaven. According to the Jade Slip, the so-called heaven fire was the flames produced from heavenly lightning. It would require a violent storm, as he would be using the naturally occurring lightning in the refinement process. Even if he were to use a heavenly lightning bead, something that was refined from worldly lightning, it wouldn't require lightning but that power turned into flame. So long as the conditions were fulfilled, he'd be able to refine all the materials in about 3 months. Then, the completion of the Triflame fan would only be a matter of time. Additionally, he still had enough time to meet with the 9 Serenities Sect's Elder Wei at the Empire's south border. Although Han Li had agreed to his request with ulterior motives and didn't regard it with importance, there was a volcano at the southern border named Silver Snake Mountain. It erupted Yilong and was a famous fire vein in the Great Jin. Many cultivators would go there to refine their magic tools and treasures, allowing him to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He was also quite interested in the matter, given how seriously Elder Wei treated the request. To tell the truth, he had completed about half of his objectives in the Great Jin. All that was left was for him to acquire the removal incantation for the Soul Seal Curse from the Yin Sifting Sect and seize back the 2 flying swords from the Elder Devil. Before then, he would have to refine another set of his flying swords with the new auric essence. After thinking about this for a long while, he settled on a plan of action, but there were still 2 matters he had to handle first. He promptly flew towards a small mountain range on the island and released his hidden fortune mansion on top of one. After placing down a few concealment formations, he entered his hidden chambers. 6 days later, he had taken in the spirit form talisman that he acquired into his body. With that done, he sat down cross-legged and flung a spirit beast pouch from his waist into the air. The bag opened and white mist spilled out to reveal a meter-long yellow demon beast that resembled a pangolin. It was the armored earth dragon he acquired several years prior. The beast had various colored restriction talismans stuck all around its body, and its limbs were pierced with several sparkling golden needles, leaving it motionlessly lying on the floor. When Han Li released it, its eyes anxiously wandered and it looked at Han Li with a miserable appearance. It appeared that these few years had greatly weakened the beast's unruliness. Han Li eerily said, "There is no need to play the fool, demon beast. You will agree to pay allegiance to me, release your spiritual senses of your own accord, and allow me to subject you to a soul restraint. Otherwise, I'll simply kill you. Your demon core and scales should fetch me a good price." When the armored earth dragon heard this, its body trembled and fear betrayed in its eyes. But then, it resentfully glared at him. Han Li looked at the beast and bluntly said, "I won't have you become an inherited spirit beast. You will only be under control during my lifetime. During this, if I perish or ascend to the next realm, you'll be freed. Since your lives are far longer than ours, this will only be a moment of your time." The dragon's gaze wavered and appeared to show hesitation. Han Li mysteriously smiled and slapped his storage pouch, summoning a small green bottle into his hand. Foosh! Purple flames ignited, enveloping the bottle and releasing its lid into the air. Then, a glacial mist quickly shot out and rapidly dropped the temperature in the room. When the dragon felt this glacial chi, its entire body began to tremble and astonishment appeared in its eyes. Han Li flicked his wrist and a drop of silver liquid flew out from the bottle and quickly condensed into a pearl. Its eyes grew dull and its nose began to twitch towards the pearl. Suddenly, bestial snarls began to leave its mouth as if in a show of excitement. "Good. You recognize it. If you agree to become my spirit beast, I'll give you 2 drops of glacial quintessence, allowing you an opportunity to survive ascension tribulation. Now choose," Han Li coldly said. Though the dragon was tempted by the pearl, its face still twitched with hesitance. After a long while, the demon beast still didn't make any clear signs. Han Li snorted and then put the bottle away. Then, purple flames flickered from his hand and slowly condensed into the form of a sword. When the armored earth dragon sensed the sword's fearsome spiritual power, its expression shifted. Han Li then released the sword, causing the demon beast to scream out in terror and yelp out in submission. 1. The 100 Possibilities Pavilion is a sect allied to the Drifting Cloud sect and share the Dream Cloud Mountains with them alongside the Ancient Sword sect in the Heavenly South. Han Li visited it when he fought against the Ancient Sword sect's eccentric Jin in Chapter 869. Chapter 973, Twin Scorpion Mountain. Half a day later, Han Li put away the hidden fortune mansion and flew off to the mainland in a streak of light. He rapidly reached land after a few undisturbed weeks. He didn't revisit the Heavenly Talisman sect and instead rushed to Nanjiang, the southern border. He intermittently stopped throughout the journey to refine the portion of the Triflame fan that required human flames. Han Li was gloomy that he wasn't able to encounter a thunderstorm along the way. He wasn't worried, rather the opposite. The dense jungles of the southern border had a rainy climate with lightning often mixed in. It would only be a matter of time before he could refine the heaven flame. For months had passed before Han Li arrived at the Nanjiang 1 region, having to go through multiple provinces along the way. 1. The Nanjiang region is a name that literally translates to the southern border. Not only is this territory on the southern border, but its name literally translates to this as well. The region was one of the few places that weren't under the rule of a large sect. Rather, the region's resources were split up between a dozen or so mid-grade sects. Although there would commonly be strife in between these sects, if an external power were to invade, they would immediately unite. Even the great 10 righteous and devilish sects haven't been able to subject the territory under their rule, assuming an almost independent position in the Jin Empire. Under such conditions, these sects were distrusting of outsiders and cultivated closely related techniques that were born of themselves. They mostly cultivated rare yin poison techniques that were rarely seen. Not only were they skilled in using poison and insects, their skills in curses had reached perfection. If one fought with a Nanjiang cultivator, a single moment of carelessness would result in a vicious, unblockable blow. The Chaoyun prefecture was placed west in Nanjiang, with Twin Scorpion Mountain located in one of its desolate mountain ranges. It was covered in miasma hundreds of kilometers wide long. Unless one had high enough cultivation or took medicine for the miasma, they would be unable to enter. The mountain range was actually somewhat famous in Nanjiang. As a result of its miasma, the mountain grew many valuable poisonous plants and is the home to 2 types of venomous scorpions that were ideal for low-grade cultivators using insect techniques. When Han Li arrived near this mountain, it was during the yearly eruption of miasma. Many cultivators were gathered nearby as the 2 breeds of venomous scorpions would emerge from their burrows during this time. However, a majority of these cultivators were at Qi condensation stage with a few Foundation establishment cultivators mixed in. Since the mountain range was of little interest to high-grade cultivators, not even a single core formation cultivator was present. If a mid-nascent soul eccentric like Han Li was discovered in the area, it would be cause for a great commotion. As such, he hadn't stayed in the mountain surroundings and instead flew into the dense, pink miasma. The azure light protecting his body easily blocked it and the venomous insects that lurked inside. After making sure of his bearings, he directly made his way to the heart of the mountain. Although Elder Wei had originally mentioned the name of the Twin Scorpion Mountain, he hadn't given a specific point. As such, Han Li decided to visit the main peak first. While he flew and pondered about the purpose behind Elder Wei's request, he suddenly heard a miserable scream from far away. It's a Scorpion King, an iron-tail scorpion variant. Everyone, run! A horseman's voice shouted out in terror, followed by the nearby sounds of explosions and a strange insect's cry. Han Li glanced in their direction with blue light flickering from his eyes. With sounds of tearing wind, a group of men and women began to appear within the miasma as they rushed in his direction. They were running with pointed feet and were sweeping across the ground in a clear display of body lightening techniques. One of the women in the group caused Han Li to suddenly yelp in surprise when he saw her. Soon after, he swept his sleeve and an azure mist spread out, clearing the miasma in the area, clearing an area of 100 meters. The group came to a sudden stop when they entered the clearing. Before they could react, Han Li pointed to the area behind them and made a fist. A hand of azure light appeared and captured something black in its grasp. Then, it flew in a circle and returned to Han Li. The hand held a foot-long scorpion with a shiny jet-black shell. Its half-foot-long tail was barbed and glowed with a purple light. This was the iron-tail scorpion variant that was pursuing these low-grade cultivators. The scorpion was only a grade 2 spirit beast, and was firmly confined by the hand of light, only capable of snarling in its capture. These cultivators were all dumbstruck when they saw Han Li in the air and were at a complete loss. The light around him scattered and he asked one of the women, "I didn't think I'd see fellow Daoist Wang here after I left the Jin capital. Is young Miss Cao doing well?" 1. Its fellow Dano, Senior Han. Junior Marshal Sister Cao is still in the Jin capital. I've only come here with a few comrades in search of spirit medicines. Lady Wang hurriedly took the initiative to respectfully salute him. Ever since Han Li took off after he was attracted by the sword cry, she had come to realize Han Li's identity as a high-grade cultivator and didn't dare to act casually with him. When the others saw that Lady Wang recognized this great cultivator, they felt relieved and all stepped forward and saluted Han Li in thanks. However, they all believed Han Li to be at core formation stage as nascent soul cultivators were far beyond the possibility of contact. Han Li nodded in acknowledgement and then turned to look at the confined scorpion with a frown. As the niece of the South Pillar General, you shouldn't need to brave the risk of looking for spiritual herbs. Lady Wang's expression blanked and then she wryly smiled. Although my clan is rich and has provided me with a few spirit stones, my aptitude is only average. How could they possibly afford so many spirit stones on me? In truth, your aptitude is quite good. Foundation establishment stage isn't out of reach for you. Since we had the fate to meet again, I'll hand this over to you. I have business to attend to soon. Take care of yourselves. After that was said, Han Li casually pointed to the hand of light. With a soft bang, the hand scattered into specks of light and the large scorpion trembled before falling to the ground, completely immobile. Senior, just as Lady Wang was about to utter words of thanks, Han Li disappeared in a flash and her words came to a sudden stop. The other cultivators looked at the large scorpion variant with envy. However, since the scorpion was something a high-grade cultivator had given her, none of them dared to rob her. They could only watch as the woman stuck several talismans on it and happily placed it in her spirit beast pouch. Moments later, an explosion sounded out and the miasma covering the sky began to coil. Then, a furious wind scattered some of the miasma to reveal a black storm cloud floating in the air. At that moment, Han Li glanced at the black mountain in the distance and muttered, "The time has finally come." He then flew towards the mountain in a streak. Rolls of thunder sounded out and heavy rain pelted the surrounding miasma, causing it to shrink down to several meters off the ground. On the mountain in the distance, a storm began to reveal itself. Han Li descended onto a large boulder on the mountaintop, remaining dry with the aid of a barrier of light surrounding him. However, there were 8 cultivators already gathered, 2 at Foundation Establishment and the rest at Qi Condensation. The group all had their hair wrapped in a bun and wore native outfits. When they saw Han Li appear, they all looked at each other in dismay. Han Li swept his gaze at the cultivators and released a flood of astonishing spiritual qi. After waving his arm at the cultivators, he coldly shouted, "Get lost!" As wind wildly blew around him, a mist of azure mist surged. In their alarm, a few of the cultivators released protective barriers and hastily flew off on their magic tools. However, all of them were engulfed by azure mist and flung 100 meters away. This made for a sorry sight as they wore faces of terror. At that moment, they wordlessly rushed off the mountain now that they knew Han Li was a high-grade cultivator. As Han Li watched them disappear from the mountaintop, he expressionlessly turned his gaze to the sky. Lightning roared and danced in the black clouds above him. 1. The green-robed woman Han Li spoke to was Cao Mengrong's senior martial sister Wang, who he had earlier met on his way to the Jin capital. Chapter 974. Visitors. After his outburst, Han Li felt the last trace of distress from monarch soul divergences passing dissolve. In any case, since he planned on gathering the storm's lightning, he didn't want any interruptions. With a long sigh, he slapped his storage pouch and took out various colored spell flags, sending them off in every direction with a wave of his hand, burrowing into the ground without a trace. He looked at the unceasing lightning in the sky and the corner of his mouth twitched. His body glowed with light as he floated 100 meters in the air. Forming a strange hand gesture, he began to mutter an incantation. Suddenly, Various colored light flashed from down below. Muffled pops sounded out, followed by several pillars of luminescence emerging to the sky and forming huge spell flags. They stood off the ground and remained completely motionless. Continuing his incantations, the spell flags beneath him began to release threads of spiritual chi and slowly took the form of a 30-meter-wide spirit-gathering spell formation. Within the brilliant glow, talisman characters began to rise from the center, fully activating it. In that instant, the lightning flashing in the distant skies was suddenly attracted towards the formation and gradually grew closer as the sounds of thunder quickened. Han Li narrowed his eyes and ceased casting incantations. He flipped his hand and summoned a slender jade bottle, a magic tool he had specifically refined to capture the lightning. He released it into the air and struck it with an azure spell seal, causing it to quickly spin several times before it held still in the air. At that moment, Han Li clapped his hands and raised them, releasing 2 dense bolts of golden lightning, both simultaneously striking the bottom of the jade bottle. In a clap of thunder, the bottle trembled and completely absorbed the lightning. With a murmur, Han Li pointed at the air. Crackles sounded out as lightning arced from the bottle and formed a flickering 10-meter-tall pole pointing up into the dark sky. Silver lightning split the sky and struck the golden pole before it was dragged into the bottle. This happened in great succession as more and more silver bolts struck down and was easily collected. 2 hours later, the bottle gathered another dense bolt and began to release the sounds of a rumbling storm. When he heard this, he inwardly rejoiced. He raised his arm and reached out for the bottle, causing the golden pole to disappear and summoning the jade bottle into his hand. He then flung his sleeve into the sky and produced another bottle of a similar appearance, repeating the process all over again. With that done, he began to carefully examine the bottle that he recovered. It rumbled and trembled without end, flashing dazzling silver light from its mouth as if it could rupture at any moment. Han Li slapped a golden talisman onto it, and the bottle's activity came to a sudden halt. After properly placing the lid and putting it away, he turned his attention to the sky once more. Half a day later, Han Li collected his 4th bottle, but the thunderstorm showed no signs of stopping. Rather, the rain only grew heavier. He pondered to himself before putting away his 4th bottle. He believed he nearly collected enough lightning to create the heavenly flame he needed for the Triflame fans materials. But his expression stirred solemn and he suddenly turned to a corner of the sky. He faintly saw a flash, followed by the appearance of a white streak. He knew that with the shining spell formation beneath him and the bolts of lightning wildly dancing above him, his position was extremely noticeable. The white streak hurriedly shot in Han Li's direction. It stopped 100 meters away and the light disappeared to reveal a woman in palace robes. She had a slender stature and a dainty appearance with a pair of vivid eyes, seeming to be a beauty in the prime of her youth. Her robes were made of some sort of rare material that not only shined with silver light but also glowed dazzlingly. Han Li swept his spiritual sense past her and discovered that this woman was a mid-nascent soul cultivator much like himself. She looked at him and sweetly smiled. She said with a soft, pleasant voice, "I am North Night Islands by Yaoi. Are you also here on business with fellow Daoist Fu?" Han Li's heart trembled and he astoundingly asked, "Are you a cultivator from the North Night Palace?" Bai Yaoi chuckled, "I am the North Night Palace's external affairs elder. Since we are located in a remote area, I am surprised that you know of it. May I ask for your esteemed name?" Han Li calmed down and answered, "My surname is Han, a vagrant cultivator from overseas. I have indeed come to meet with fellow Daoist Fu, though I have long heard of your palace's resounding reputation." Bai Yaoi stole an interested glance at Han Li and asked, "Oh, does fellow Daoist Han know or have a relationship with any of the 3 great overseas immortals?" "I've never met them as I'm not someone who often deal with others. I normally cultivate in seclusion on my island." "So it was like that. I've been presumptuous. Does fellow Daoist Han need any assistance in collecting lightning?" "Many thanks for the offer, but I am about done. This will be the last bottle." When Bai Yaoi heard him, she flew a circle in the air and landed on another rock. "Ah, then I will go ahead and rest as we wait." She raised her hand and summoned an umbrella magic tool up into the sky. It swirled in the air before releasing a cloud of white light down below, blocking any rain from approaching her. Then, she calmly sat down and summoned a palm-sized object into her hand in a flash of cold light. Han Li narrowed his eyes and immediately glanced at the item. It was as white as fresh snow and shined with sparkling glamour. Ice jade. He immediately recognized the same myriad-year ice jade from the bottle, the glacial quintessence he acquired. Using the plate of ice jade in her hands, she closed her eyes and sank deep into meditation. It appeared that the woman's cultivation art wasn't purely an ice attribute, but rather that of glacial yin, else she wouldn't have needed to draw on the support of the jade's glacial power. This would produce a somewhat similar result to Han Li's snow soul pills, but it couldn't possibly compare to the effectiveness, no matter the quality of the jade. Though Han Li's expression remained calm, he unconsciously grew wary of the woman. Given how the North Night Palace would rather fight to the death against high-grade demon beasts every several generations than hand over some of their glacial quintessence, it was clear to see how much they valued it. If he allowed this woman to know he had her sect's signature treasure on hand, it would certainly be troublesome. Not long after, he put away his 5th bottle full of lightning and slowly floated to the center of the spirit-gathering spell formation. Then, after striking it with several spell seals, it formed an azure barrier around him, blocking the storm from disturbing him. Then, he took a seat with his eyes closed. Of course, he couldn't refine any of the Triflame fans materials in this woman's presence. Soon, only the sounds of thunder and wind could be heard. After an entire day, the rain finally began to slowly go away and the scorching sun appeared in the sky. The weather immediately became hot and humid as miasma slowly restored its domain, enveloping the entire range once more. In addition, the many insects that had taken refuge had again emerged from the ground. With great calm, Han Li slowly released his spiritual sense to a 10-kilometer range. Able to sense everything from the trees to the smallest insect all clearly in his mind, he sank into tranquil meditation. Whenever low-grade cultivators made their way up the mountain, they would immediately flee with terror after discovering the astonishing cultivation of the 2 nascent soul cultivators. As for Han Li and the palace-robed woman, they remained seated for 3 entire days. On the morning of the 4th day, another high-grade cultivator eventually arrived on the main mountain. This time, it was a man with a towering stature. He had a grotesque appearance and dark, shiny skin. From the result of some unknown technique, he left behind an evil wind in his tracks as he flew here on a large tortoise shell. When this large man saw them both, he heartily laughed and found another boulder to sit on. However, he had no intention of meditating. Instead, he took out a sparkling golden book and began to read it. His scholarly actions made for a drastic contrast with his appearance. Although they had turned a blind eye to his actions, Han Li was in truth inwardly frowning. This towering man was also at mid-nascent soul stage. It appeared that Old Man Fu's objective would be unordinary to gather so many cultivators at their level. Chapter 975. The Nascent Cultivating Pill. Following the new arrival, the 3 cultivators each tended to their own matters, not bothering to strike up any conversation. It wasn't until half a month later, when the miasma had mostly retreated, that 2 more striking lights flew towards the mountain with practiced coordination. The 2 streaks circled above and dropped down in the middle of the 3 to reveal the 9 Serenities sect Elder Wei and a beautiful black-clothed woman with thick eyebrows and a solemn face. While she remained silent and emotionless, Elder Wei looked at the 3 with a happy bearing and said, "You 3 have honored me with your timely arrival. I was originally making preparations in case any of you were missing, but it seems it wasn't necessary." The large man coldly smiled and bluntly said, "Although I have come, I am currently in a crucial point in overcoming my bottleneck. If Brother Fu's affairs disinterest me, I will immediately leave." "Don't worry, Brother Yuan. You should know that I speak truly, since I've requested fellow Taoists Han and Bai to come as well. But before that, an introduction is due. This is my junior martial sister Chang Zhifang, the 9 Serenities sect's internal affairs elder. Since you've stemmed from the Nanjiang Sacred Poison sect, we'll especially need the assistance of a native like yourself, Brother Yuan. As for fellow Daoist Han, he possesses astonishing abilities and is a vagrant cultivator from overseas. Fellow Daoist Bai is." Old Man Fu then proceeded to give a quick introduction of one another. When the others heard Old Man Fu mention that Han Li possessed astonishing abilities, Cultivator Yuan and Bai Yaoi both looked at him with a trace of surprise. Han Li frowned when he heard this and said, Fellow Daoist Fu is overpraising me. My cultivation is rather average. Where have you heard of my said astonishing abilities? With a deep tone, Old Man Fu deeply said, there is no need to hide it. Not only have you killed the old man Xiao in the Jin capital, but after the trade meet, did you not also kill the illustrious monk Wickedfire? Given your vast cultivation, what is there to say? Monk Wickedfire was killed by fellow Daoist Han. Cultivator Yuan suddenly looked at Han Li with a vastly changed expression. Bai Yaoi also revealed shock. Only the black-clothed woman appeared indifferent, as if she already knew beforehand. Han Li bitterly chuckled and said with a helpless tone, Brother Fu must be mistaken. While I did kill an unknown early nascent soul cultivator in the Jin capital, the one who killed this monk Wickedfire was another cultivator. Do you believe that a vagrant like myself could possess such heaven-defying abilities? Another cultivator? I heard that there were two similar-faced cultivators that fought against monk Wickedfire. Could it be that it truly wasn't you? Old Man Fu's expression relaxed, but he spoke with a tone of doubt. Han Li rubbed his chin and said, Brother Fu truly overestimates me. If I have the power to kill a mid-nascent soul cultivator in an instant, why would I need to avoid the yin sifting sect? I could boldly leave and none would dare to block me. Regardless, that old man Xiao was exceptionally cunning and was skilled in several evasion techniques. Being able to kill him already displays exceptional abilities. In any case, do you recognize the cultivator that killed monk Wickedfire? TCH, the sudden appearance of a late nascent soul cultivator can surely only mean that they come from overseas. Old Man Fu asked with a greatly interested tone. Han Li shook his head and calmly said, the cultivator who killed monk Wickedfire only had the same face as me. We don't have the slightest relationship. What a pity. If we were able to find him, our odds of success would be even greater. With that said, Old Man Fu dryly laughed and dropped the topic. Cultivator Yuan then asked, I also heard that a two-headed and four-armed devil appeared near the underground trade meet on the last day. It devoured several early nascent soul cultivators. Was it not for the great cultivator overseeing the trade meeting, the entire group would have been eliminated. Does Brother Han know of this matter? Han Li answered, I don't, I was already far away when it happened. Cultivator Yuan wore a doubtful expression when he heard this. At that moment, Bai Yaoi asked, Fellow Daoist Fu, how about you tell us about this appointment? I wouldn't have come to such a faraway place if it weren't for that small favor I owed you. Of course. However, since this matter is of great importance, it'd be best that we take necessary precautions. Then, Old Man Fu flicked his fingers all around him and released a dozen streaks of green fire. They ruptured into bursts of dark flame and faded away into mists of green light. Han Li swept his spiritual sense past them and found the faint fluctuations of the restriction. Although he didn't know what kind he employed, the ease at which he set it up had caused his heart to tremble. He couldn't help but think higher of the old man. Both Bai Yaoi and Cultivator Yuan swept their spiritual sense past the restriction as well, and they couldn't help but feel a trace of excitement at how seriously the old man was acting. Old Man Fu let out a deep breath and solemnly said, In truth, I've been preparing for this for over the last 30 years, and now a true opportunity has appeared. Have you fellow Taoists ever heard of an ancient medicine known as the Nascent Cultivating Pill? The Nascent Cultivating Pill. Bai Yaoi and Cultivator Yuan both appeared at a loss, but when Han Li heard this name, his expression stirred. When Cultivator Yuan saw this, he asked, Does fellow Daoist Han know of the medicine pill? After a moment of thought, Han Li elaborated, Yes, a little bit. The Nascent Cultivating Pill was an ancient sect's signature spiritual medicine, and can be considered of divine quality. It was said that when the pill was taken, it would provide immense benefits to the nascent soul, allowing them to easily break through bottlenecks. However, the sect wasn't able to endure the passage of time and the medicine pill formula was lost. Now, there are only a sparse few that know of its existence. Were it not for the fact that Han Li was well researched in pill refinement and had read through many relevant ancient records, he would have no knowledge on this. Both Cultivator Yuan and Bai Yaoi showed delight. With much eager, Cultivator Yuan asked, Brother Wei, you mean to say you know the whereabouts of this pill? It stands to mention that after a cultivator entered nascent soul stage, the number of medicines and methods to break through bottlenecks, even from those of ancient times, were reduced to nearly nothing. And if someone came into possession of one, they wouldn't dare to mention it even to their kin. After so many years, such items from antiquity had mostly disappeared. Apart from the few heaven-defying items of legend, most nascent soul cultivators had to rely on cultivation advancement medicines to break through their bottlenecks. As a result, those present couldn't help but stir in excitement when they heard of the pill's effects. Old Man Fu chuckled with a proud expression. It surprises me that Han Li actually knows of the pill. That's right though, I acquired the refinement formula for this pill over 100 years ago. Fellow Daoist actually has such a treasure. Cultivator Yuan knitted his hands together and his overwhelming excitement was betrayed from the slight red light blossoming over his dark face. Both Han Li and Bao Yaoi exchanged a similar glance of happiness. Old Man Fu nodded. I am also proficient in pill refinement techniques. So long as I have all the materials, the refinement shouldn't prove to be a problem. Han Li furrowed his brow and asked, from your tone, it seems you are lacking said materials. Brother Han is quite sharp. Were it not for the fact that I was missing one of its main ingredients, I would have refined it years ago. It is for this reason that I wish for you to lend me your strength. Bai Yaoi frowned and said, since you weren't able to acquire it after so many years despite your position as a Nine Serenities sect elder, this item should be truly difficult to find. Hard to find. Old Man Fu bitterly chuckled. This material should be extinct from this world. At the time, I believed the pill formula to be useless, but I didn't think I'd find traces of it. As such, this caused me to write up plans. Cultivator Yuan impatiently said, all right, Brother Fu, please don't speak in circles. Quickly now, properly tell us what you require. Old Man Fu calmly stated, the flesh of an Umbra Yin horse. In his alarm, Han Li narrowed his eyes and asked, an Umbra Yin horse? Where did fellow Daoist find such a thing? When Bai Yaoi and Cultivator Yuan heard this, they exchanged looks of dismay. The old man chuckled and deeply said, I happen to found traces of it 30 years ago right here in Nanjiang.